So you want to own a trucking company. You buy a truck, you find a load, you drive it, or you pay somebody else to drive it, and the money arrives by the mile. Then you add a second truck, then a fifth. Every truck another engine turning fuel into revenue while you sleep. Sounds simple. It isn't, because money that arrives by the mile leaves by the mile too, and almost nobody sees the gap until they are standing in the middle of it. So what does it cost to put one truck on the road? What does it cost to keep it there? Why is the truck the second most expensive thing you will buy, and not the first? And why do the operators who run this business properly still finish the year with a margin thinner than a grocery store? Start with the paperwork, because the paperwork is where the whole business hides. To haul other people's freight across a state line, you need operating authority from the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, a motor carrier number. The application fee is $300. That figure is written into federal regulation, and it is the same $300 whether you plan to run one truck or 1,000. Your safety identifier, the USDOT number, costs nothing at all. So the government's price of admission to a business that moves 11 billion tons of freight a year is $300 in a form. Hold that number. It comes back later, and when it does, it explains everything else in this video. Now the iron, a new sleeper tractor, the kind that runs long haul with a bunk behind the seats, crossed $170,000 in 2026. Part of that is a tariff surcharge on imported components, roughly $10,000, applied by most of the major manufacturers. Nobody in this business calls that a small line item. There are two doors into this business. Buy the iron and build an authority from nothing, or buy somebody's existing company with its authority, its customers and its history already bolted on. The first door is cheaper and slower. The second is faster, and arrives with everything the seller decided not to mention. Either way, most buyers do not buy new. They buy used, and the used market is its own education. A 2-year-old sleeper was going for about $105,000 in the spring of 2026, 5 years old around $53,000, 10 years old around $27,000. The average used sleeper actually sold through dealers has roughly 478,000 miles on it and is a little under 6 years old. Look at that curve again. A truck loses about half its value in the first 5 years. That is not damage. That is what the asset does when it is working correctly. Then the trailer. A dry van is the cheap end. A reefer, a refrigerated trailer with its own diesel unit bolted to the nose, costs multiples of that, and the unit on the front is a second engine you now have to maintain. Two more things move with the deal that nobody prices in. The first is the driver. Not the truck, the driver. A truck with nobody in it earns nothing, and the industry has been running below one driver per truck for years. In the most recent full year measured, carriers averaged 0.93 drivers per truck because trucks were parked with nobody to run them. The second is the safety record. Buy a company instead of a truck, and you inherit its inspection history and its scores. Those numbers follow the authority, not the seller, and they will price your insurance for you before you ever sit in a chair with a broker. So the buy-in is $300 of permission and somewhere between $50,000 and $200,000 of steel. Here is what arrives after that, unasked. Insurance first, because insurance is the wall most new carriers hit and never climb. Federal rules set a minimum of $750,000 of public liability for a for-hire carrier moving general freight. Haul hazardous materials and that minimum climbs to $1 million, and for some commodities, $5 million. Your insurance company files the proof directly with the agency. Until that filing posts, your authority is a piece of paper that does nothing. But here is the part that matters more than the regulation. Almost no freight broker will hand you a load at the federal minimum. The working standard across the brokerage world is $1 million of auto liability and $100,000 of cargo coverage. So the government's number makes you legal, and the broker's number makes you employable, and they are not the same number. For a brand new authority, that premium runs somewhere between $10,000 and $25,000 a year for the liability alone. Before cargo, before physical damage on a truck, you are still financing. Why so high? Because the underwriter has no history on you. No safety score, no claims record, nothing to price against. You are paying for the absence of a past. And the trend line under all of this is ugly. Trucking auto liability premiums have risen roughly 36% per mile over the past 8 years, even while crash numbers came down over the last 4, and the record compounds against you. Every roadside inspection feeds a federal scoring system attached to your authority. Collect enough violations, and your scores climb. And when your scores climb, two things happen at the same time. Your premium goes up at renewal, and brokers quietly filter you out before you ever see their freight. Nobody sends a letter, the loads just stop appearing. Then the small paper, which is not small once you total it. A process agent filing, about $75. Once. Unified carrier registration, roughly $46 to $137 for a 1 or 2 truck operation. Apportioned plates through the international registration plan, $500 to $2,000 depending on weight and where you run. A fuel tax account, so that every gallon you burn in every state gets reconciled quarterly whether you remember or not. And a waiting period. Once the application posts, there is a protest window written into the regulation before the authority activates. 3 weeks of owning a truck and being legally unable to earn with it. Now the good part. How the money actually comes in? Number 1. Line haul. This is the rate for moving the freight, quoted per mile, and it is the number everybody argues about. In June of 2026, the national average spot rate for a dry van load was $3 per mile all in. Strip out the fuel piece and the line haul rate itself was $2.37. Number 2. Fuel surcharge. That gap between the $3 and the $2.37 is a separate line that moves with diesel prices. It exists so that a fuel spike does not eat a contract you signed months earlier. Run efficiently and you can keep a sliver of it. Run badly and it does not cover what you burned. Here is the mechanic under it. The surcharge is calculated off a published national diesel average and an assumed fuel economy, often around 6 miles to the gallon. Beat that assumption and the difference is yours to keep. Miss it, and you are quietly subsidizing the shipper out of your own margin, load after load, without anything on the invoice telling you so. 2 identical trucks running the same lane can finish the month a long way apart on that line alone. Number 3. Contract freight. A committed lane with a shipper at an agreed rate. In June of 2026, the national contract van rate was $2.89 all in. Contract usually pays less than a hotspot market and more than a dead one, and it is the thing that keeps a fleet alive between cycles. Number 4. Accessorials. Detention. When a shipper holds your truck past the free window. Layover. Truck ordered not used. When a load evaporates after you have already driven to the dock. These are small numbers on any one load, and they are the difference between a profitable lane and a lane you should have refused. Number 5. And this is the fleet layer. Once you have trucks and authority and a safety record, you can lease capacity from owner-operators and haul under your authority, or file for broker authority and move freight you never touch. The largest money in this industry is made by the people furthest from the steering wheel. Now work one load, 500 miles, dry van, at $3 a mile. That rate confirmation says $1,500, and $1,500 feels like a very good day. Hold on to that feeling for about 90 seconds. Here is the number this entire industry runs on. In July of 2026, the American Transportation Research Institute published its annual cost benchmark. The industry average cost to operate one truck for 1 mile in 2025 was $2.34, highest in the history of the report. Strip out fuel and it was $1.85, also a record. Listen to that again. $2.34 to turn 1 mile, and the average spot rate for a dry van, in the best market this industry has seen since 2022, is $3. That is the whole business. 66 cents. Open the ledger and watch where the $2.34 goes. Driver wages, just under 82 cents a mile. Driver benefits on top, 21 cents. Put those together, and more than 40 cents of every dollar you bill leaves for the person holding the wheel. And that is before you have bought a drop of diesel. Fuel, about 48 cents a mile. Then the stack, nobody photographs. Repair and maintenance, tires, tolls, which jumped more than 13% in a single year. Truck and trailer payments, permits. Insurance, which we already covered and which is climbing faster than almost anything else on the page. And now the invisible ones. Empty miles. 16.7% of miles turned in the most recent full measurement were run with nothing in the trailer. You paid fuel, wear, tires, and a driver's hours for every one of them, and you billed nobody. Downtime. The average truck in service is over 7 years old now, because carriers stretched replacement cycles to survive the downturn. Older iron sits in shops more. Cash timing. You deliver a load today, and get paid in 30 or 45 days. Your fuel card does not wait 30 days. Neither does payroll, which is why so many small carriers sell their invoices to a factoring company at a discount and pay for their own money. Now here is the mechanism that kills more trucking companies than any single cost line. You get paid for loaded miles. You pay for every mile. That $2.34 is the cost of turning a mile. Any mile. Loaded, empty, deadheading 100 miles to reach the next pickup. But the invoice only counts the miles with freight behind you. So take the cost of running and divide it across only the miles you can bill, and the real break-even climbs past $2.80 before you have earned a single dollar of profit. Work 1, run through it slowly, because this is the whole video in one example. You deadhead 100 miles empty to reach the shipper, then 500 loaded miles to the receiver, 600 miles of diesel, 600 miles of tires and brakes and engine hours, 600 miles off a driver's clock. The invoice counts 500. At $3 a mile, you billed $1,500. At $2.34, you spent it across 600 miles, which is $1,404. You cleared $96 on a 2-day run, in the strongest freight market since 2022. If you are the one driving, you also paid yourself inside that cost figure, and that is the only reason the run was worth turning the key for. One consulting firm put the truckload break-even at $3.12 per mile in the second quarter of 2026. First time in history it crossed $3. Read that against the spot rate. $3 a mile in a good market, break-even above $3 a mile. That is not a bad quarter. That is the structure. And the operators who survive it are the ones who understood, early, that the number on the rate confirmation and the number in their bank account have almost nothing to do with each other. So how did a business this large end up this thin? For that you have to go back to 1980, and to a signature. Before then, trucking was not an open market. Under the Motor Carrier Act of 1935, a trucker hauling freight across state lines needed something called a Certificate of Public Convenience and Necessity, issued by the Interstate Commerce Commission. You could not get one by asking. You had to prove the market needed you, and every carrier already holding one was allowed to stand up and argue that it did not. The result was a closed shop. Roughly 20,000 for-hire carriers held the rights to interstate freight in America. And because the certificates were scarce, they were worth money. Real money. They were bought, sold, financed, and carried on balance sheets as assets. A route authority was a license to print, and everybody who held one knew it. On the 1st of July, 1980, President Jimmy Carter signed the Motor Carrier Act of 1980. The act did not abolish the certificate. It did something quieter and far more destructive to the people holding them. It flipped the burden of proof. Instead of the applicant proving the market needed another carrier, the objecting carriers now had to prove it did not. Applications that used to take years and lawyers started clearing in months. The certificates stopped being scarce. And the instant they stopped being scarce, they stopped being worth anything. The following year, a law review article was published under a title that says the whole story in one line. It concerned compensating trucking companies for the loss of the monopolistic value of their operating rights. Companies were writing off, as worthless, an asset that had been collateral on their debt the year before. What happened next is the industry you are looking at today. The number of trucking companies doubled during the 1980s. Licensed carriers passed 40,000 by 1990. Employment went from about 1 million people in 1978 to about 2 million by 1996. Real operating costs per mile fell by around 75% for truckload carriers. Shippers saved billions, and consumers got cheaper everything. The people who paid for it were the incumbents. Real weekly earnings across the industry fell about 30%. Union membership dropped by nearly a quarter. And the share of for-hire truckers working as owner-operators rather than employees more than doubled. So when you pay $300 for authority today, understand what you are buying. You are buying the same permission that used to be a scarce, tradable, financeable asset. Congress did not take it away from you. Congress made it free for everybody, which amounts to the same thing. If that sounds familiar, it should. A taxi medallion is what a trucking authority used to be. Trucking just had its crash 40 years earlier, by act of Congress instead of by app. Now the failure, not a small one. Yellow Corporation was 99 years old. It was the third largest less-than-truckload carrier in the United States, running roughly 12,000 trucks and 35,000 trailers, employing about 30,000 people, 22,000 of them Teamsters. On the 30th of July, 2023, Yellow stopped taking freight. On the 6th of August, it filed for Chapter 11, largest trucking bankruptcy in American history. The company had been unwell for a very long time. A congressional oversight body reviewing the case found that Yellow had been rated below investment grade for over a decade before the pandemic, had struggled financially for years, and was at risk of bankruptcy before it ever received federal help. That help was a $700 million loan under the Pandemic Relief Act in 2020, granted on the basis that Yellow was critical to national security over objections from career defense staff. It was the single largest loan of its kind. Yellow eventually repaid all $700 million, plus more than $151 million in interest, in February of 2024. And this is where it becomes a lesson about what a trucking company actually is. Yellow paid that loan back out of a bankruptcy, not from operations, from selling roughly 130 terminal properties for close to $1.9 billion. Read that once more. The freight network could not survive. The dirt underneath it covered a $700 million federal loan, the interest, and a great deal more. Yellow ran trucks for 99 years. When the accountants finally opened it up, the most valuable thing inside was the land the trucks parked on. So what do the survivors do differently? 4 things, and none of them are about driving. First, they know cost per mile, not cost per load. A carrier who knows their true number to the cent can look at a rate on a load board and decide in 4 seconds. A carrier who does not know it takes the load because it feels like a lot of money, and finds out in April. Second, they kill empty miles. That means running the same lanes over and over until you know every shipper, every receiver, and every backhaul on them. Lane density beats rate hunting. A slightly cheaper load out of a market with reliable freight coming back is worth more than a great rate into a dead one. Third, they balance contract and spot. Contract freight is the floor that pays the truck payment in a bad month. Spot is the upside that pays for a truck in a good one. Run pure spot, and the market decides your income. Run pure contract and you leave money on the table every time rates spike. Fourth, and this is the one nobody puts on a poster, they hold cash. Freight is paid in arrears, 30 to 45 days after you deliver. Fuel is paid at the pump, today, in front of a cashier. That gap is why so many small carriers factor their invoices, selling money they are already owed at a discount so it arrives this week instead of next month. Factoring is not a trick played on truckers. It is the price of a cash gap. An operator who understands their cash cycle pays it on purpose and stops. An operator who does not pays it forever. Carriers almost never die from a shortage of loads. They die from a shortage of cash on a Tuesday, 3 weeks before the money they are already owed shows up. And the good ones buy their iron counter cyclically. Used truck prices swing hard. Buying a truck at the top of a boom is how a carrier makes a payment for 6 years on an asset that lost a third of its value in 18 months. So does it work? Take the good year. 1 truck, 100,000 miles turned. Roughly 83,000 of them loaded and billable. At current spot rates, that grosses somewhere around $240,000 to $250,000. It sounds like the number of a serious business, and the tax office will treat it like one. Now what lands in the operator's pocket? The accounting firm that keeps the books for tens of thousands of American owner-operators puts the average net income of its clients at around $65,000. The middle third of its long-term clients, around $86,000. The top third, around $156,000. So the spread between an average operator and a good one is not the truck. Both are driving the same truck. It is everything we just went through. Now the bad year, which was not a hypothetical. It was 2023 through 2025. Spot rates went sideways for years. Costs hit records anyway. Carriers cut their truck counts by 2.4% in a single year, the largest capacity reduction since the downturn started, and cut non-driver staff by nearly 8% on top of it. Operating margins for truckload and refrigerated carriers stayed below 1%. Flatbed carriers ran at an operating loss. Sit with that. Not thin margins. A -1 across an entire segment for a year, and scale does not save you from it. 5 trucks grossing $240,000 each is $1.2 million of revenue. At a 1% operating margin, that business earned $12,000 for the year, on over $500,000 of equipment, a payroll, and your signature on every loan. Which brings it back to the $300. You are not buying a trucking company. You are buying a permit that was once a scarce and valuable asset, bolted to a machine that is worth less with every mile it turns. Congress made the permit cheap on purpose 46 years ago, and it worked exactly as intended. Freight got cheaper for everybody in America. Everybody except the person holding the keys.